I watched another movie that I thought was completely ridiculous, and it's a movie that we mentioned on one of the last shows, like outside of the box horror movies or something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you guys will disagree, but I watched for the first time Aubrey Rose. So
which
I haven't seen it in so long, man.
I haven't ever seen it. So
Anthony Hopkins and Marsha Mason. So Anthony Hopkins thinks the spirit of his dead daughter is in Marsha Mason's daughter. And so they go to court to prove that reincarnation exists. It is that ridiculous. So, and it's directed by Robert Wise, obviously as a kind of post-exorcist wannabe.
Right, yeah, it was, yeah.
And I only wish that someone had taken it and reshot and recut the last 20 minutes of it, since it's a Robert Wise movie.
That's funny.
I think you should take every Robert Wise movie.
If we could just lose all of the reels of it and then recut it.
Re-edit the last 20 minutes and lose the original negative. That's what you should do to every one of Robert Wise's movies. Screw him. I'm sorry.
Well, he was just doing what he was told. He was just doing what he was told. He was in a difficult position.
That should be an acceptable excuse for anyone that screws with his movies.
I think if they did that to the last 2 hours of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, I'd be eternally grateful. But dude,
that's a funny line.
My dad took me to see that. My dad took us to see that movie, and the only thing that I thought was really great about that movie was the trailer for The Empire Strikes Back. Because you can maybe when you're a little kid, I don't care, you're 8 or 9, you're just waiting. Star Trek: The Motion Picture, you're just waiting for something to happen, and you're just like, okay, they're wearing these dentist uniforms in the future.
I guess nothing's going to happen.
No, you're waiting. You're just going to the bathroom was more exciting during that movie.
I did watch the new Orson Welles documentary that opens New York and L.A. next month. It's that one directed by
Magician.
directed by Chuck Workman. It's really inventively edited. It's very fast-paced, and it goes from the beginning of his life to the end, but it's not terribly revealing. There's one line in the movie that is revealing, where one of his classmates say, Orson Welles was the least empathetic person I've ever met. It's like he had no understanding of people or sensitivity towards people. That line is just kind of dropped in there, and it's not explored. It never reappears later in the movie. That would have been a fascinating track to follow. The whole thing where his theater career and how groundbreaking his theater career was, that's done a lot better in the American Experience, The Battle Over Citizen Kane, over that documentary, which is the great documentary, I think, about Citizen Kane from birth to Citizen Kane. That's the best documentary about Orson Welles, is that movie.
Right.
Can we talk about Welles for a little bit since you brought this up?
Oh yes. Let's bring up the other big news.
The other side of the wind, and then I want to bring up something else. But I actually think this is one of the most important stories of the last couple of years. I mean, I think this is just. I can't wait to watch this.
I'm totally fascinated by Other Side of the Wind. Just to let people know, just in case they don't know, the Other Side of the Wind is the final film by Orson Welles that he directed, often while staying with friends and stuff, using their mansions, including Peter Bogdanovich, who's actually in the movie, and allowed his home to be used as a set, and he's the one that's taking over the film, and they've finally gotten the rights to cut the film, and he's taking Orson Welles' notes and which he has full access to, and trying to recut the film. Now they've got all of the reels together, and they've got the rights issues ironed out with his widow Oja Kadar and so forth. So they're going through with this.
Isn't it interesting,
that's wonderful?
Isn't it interesting how it's an Orson Welles movie starring John Huston, and Orson Welles was the original. They originally wanted Orson Welles to play in Chinatown in John Huston's role.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that, actually.
Right around the same time.
Why didn't Orson Welles do it? Why didn't Orson Welles do Chinatown?
I have no idea. I think he might have been drunk at the time. But the
too much Parmesan wine. Too much Parmesan.
There's a book that this guy's been writing about it for a few years, and I contacted him like a year and a half ago and said, I'd love to have you on the show to talk about the other side of the wind. And he says, as soon as I'm done with the book, in the next year or two, I'll be happy to come on. And he's got the perfect ending for his book now, because it's finally seeing the light of day.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to bring up Wells, because, the older I get, I find the more fascinating I find him. I think it's. And let me ask you guys a question: has the Magnificent Ambersons Has there ever been a definitive, like a Criterion or something along that line, DVD or Blu-ray release of the Magnificent Ambersons?
Well, it can never be definitive because all that original footage is missing.
Yeah, I know they made like a mini-series that, like, a couple of years ago that was like, you know.
The A&D miniseries with William Hurt and Madeline Stowe, yeah. But
the reason I bring this film up is because I think this film says more about today than, I obviously he identified, I think, with even back then, I think he identified with some of the characters in the book, in the movie. I've never read the book, and I really would like to go find a used copy of the book and read it and rewatch the movie again, even though it's obviously not the version he would want you to see. But I think it's a fascinating movie because it talks about it's in some ways very much like the Wild Bunch, if you will. People have outlived their time. And here where you have technology is going through a seismic shift in the Magnificent Ambersons, the end of the horse and buggy and in this era that we live in today, the end of so many technologies.
I think here's where I'm trying to I want to get to the heart of it. The heart of the movie is that one sequence where Tim Holt, as you know, the Amberson son, is sitting at the table with all of his grandfather and his mother and Joseph Cotton, who's invented the car.
Right.
And he says at the table, he says, the car had no reason to be invented. It had no business being invented, and it's going to ruin everything. And Joseph Cotton, who's invented the car, says basically, you may be right. It may have ruined everything, but it's here, and we have to deal with it. And this is the crux of what the movie is. It's about here's progress. Progress has now come to fruition, and whether it's a step backwards or a step forwards, that's for the future.
You know what,
the future
Dean?
To decide.
You know what, Dean? That sounds like our argument about film versus digital the other week.
I know, it's true. It's true. I think that's a good. I think that's a great. That's a great correlation. It's just, but it really applies to just every step of progress. Whether you want to call it progress, whether you want to call it just
or step backwards,
or like we don't know if we don't know if any kind of invention or whatever is going to be good for humanity or bad for humanity.
Right.
It could be the destruction of humanity or whatever.
With every advancement, we just have to live with the drawbacks. The online world is a big advancement. It's also allowed us to realize that there are many more assholes on the planet than we originally suspected.
Yeah. Now we know.
And that's depressing.
In and of itself. Semites all over the world. But the reason I just find as I've gotten older and I understand the film more, that the film, why didn't this would be the film that you would honestly, obviously you could say that it's, obviously the time it's sophomore slump or whatever, but no, this film was so ahead of its time.
I think it's sophomore slump at all, and I'll tell you another thing.
At the time, though.
I know, but even then, they were going to shit on Orson Welles. Now, he could have come out with Citizen Kane squared, and they would have shit on him. So, and to me, actually, I find Magnificent Ambersons to be an eminently, even in its present form now, an eminently more fascinating, sort of like engrossing movie than Citizen Kane, to tell you the truth.
Absolutely.
I actually sometimes when you talk to people who watch Citizen Kane, they're expecting a lot and they're watching it for the first time. They find that it, well, frankly, kind of makes them a little sleepy. And I kind of understand that in a way. I'm not shitting on Citizen Kane because it's the greatest, but for me, I would tell those people, I would say, well, go and watch Magnificent Ambersons instead of Citizen Kane. I mean, like, then you can see like somebody who's really. That's a movie that just barrels right through, and there's nothing sleepy about it.
No, I agree. I mean,
and it was too bold, and the ending was too much of a downer, and the studio did not want that. But could you imagine what we would have had if Hollywood was brave enough to champion this man's talent instead of burying it?
Trying to destroy him because he was viewed as an outsider.
Yeah, and let's just be clear. I mean, this is a great film. Giant sort of tells the same story, cattle versus oil, if you will. You know, when James Dean Jet Brink strikes the oil, you know, and he shows us, and he becomes a new era of wealth in Texas. And, you know, he's not really much different from the Joseph Cotton character. You know, if you think about it, there's a definitely a correlation there. So, and Giant, you know,
well, of course. Let me just. That's an interesting thing that you bring up because it's. I love Giant. I'm like in the. I don't know. I think that's a movie that also gets shit on these days.
Big time.
And I think that's unfortunate. But the difference is though that with Jet Rink and Giant. He's not. I mean, he's successful, but it's only by chance. He's not really a pioneer. He's just.
No. I would call Jet Brink a pioneer.
Yeah, so he's not really a pioneer like Joseph Cotton is.
No, but it's a similar kind of. I mean,
what do you think? What do you think is the difference in life path, downfall, decline between Orson Welles and Marlon Brando?
It's a good question.
Well, they both share similar things. I mean, well, I would say that, okay, well, the great similarity is obvious, is that they were both people who were, well, let's just say, into the pleasures of the flesh. So that made them rather corpulent as time went on. So, I mean, that's the most obvious similarity. And it also made them both sort of... I wonder if it made them both sort of like standoffish towards everyone. I think probably also too.
My main question is, were they both the major architects of their downfall?
Yes, they were, but it's also I don't think it's any fault of their own because I think that they were working so far ahead of almost everybody that were surrounding them, even people that they admired and everything. They were working so far ahead of them that they were like the smart person in class who was bored. You know, who was totally bored.
You bring up Brando, and it's very funny. Brando, you know, in the '60s was considered box office poison. He made some really great movies, though. Regardless of their box office performance, he was in some really great movies. I don't get me wrong, he made some bad movies, too, but he was in some really great movies. But it is, like, you know, no one wanted him. Paramount did not want him in The Godfather. But you have to...
Well, I'll tell you the main difference.
Okay.
Orson Welles, Marlon Brando, cursed out acting. It's a child's game. It's not a respectable profession.
But he kept doing it.
He poo-pooed over it, but begrudgingly. And only for big paydays. Now, Orson Welles, the difference there is Orson Welles said, I wish I'd never started making films. But, you know, you can't help who you fall in love with. I mean, it's like, I wish I hadn't fallen in love. I mean, I just can't help it.
Right.
And he continued to toil on the fringes, making crap as an actor so he could afford to shoot a little piece of this movie at a time over a period of years. And he did that till the end of his life. So, so I think it's a difference of passion.
I think that it's also, you know, Orson Welles was damned from the beginning. Okay, he was damned from the beginning, even before he got to Hollywood. They look down on him.
Who do you think you
radio
are?
past and everything.
Yeah.
Who do you think you are for coming in here? So that didn't happen to Marlon Brando. When Marlon Brando came in, everybody said, "Finally, you're here." They were welcomed him in with open arms. So Marlon Brando never really had that sort of uphill climb. Really, I mean, he had a little bit at the end of the '60s to get to The Godfather. But after The Godfather, it was all uphill, and after that, he didn't even really care. He was like, "I'll go and act when I want to act. I'll go and act, and if I want to go and act in Don Juan DeMarco, I'm going to do it. But and I'll do it for a pittance."
And free money.
Yeah,
free money.
But,
let's not forget free money.
Yes, exactly. But I think it's a little bit of an apples and oranges thing in a little ways, although they do have similarities that I think do bear sort of to, I think a comparison is okay. But I think that's the big thing. The big thing there is, the big difference is that Orson had to just, and after a while, after you do the greatest, imagine doing what people think, at least in the 60s, they started thinking this after it had been on television, that Citizen Kane was the greatest movie ever made. Well, imagine if you had done the greatest movie that had ever been made, and then you still couldn't get a fucking movie off the ground to save your life. Like you had to work at things, and it became kind of like your hobby. Like, I'm gonna work at things so I can pump money into this thing. It's basically, people are looking at it like it's my fucking weekend gig or something.
Yeah,
and it's that must be like totally like crushing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's got to be beyond. I mean, but he did some great. I mean, Third Man, obviously, and The Stranger and things like that. I mean, he did some great acting work. But then, I guess once we get into the '60s, for Orson, they're funny performances and everything. But it's really sad. There's a whole generation that only knows him from the Paul Masson ad.
Well, to be fair, I mean, Chimes at Midnight is frequently cited as the greatest Shakespeare on film.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of those Shakespeare movies, Macbeth, Othello, those are great movies and everything. But I mean, and they're created out of total like nothing. Like they look great, but they're like created out of nothing. Mm-hmm. Like just So that lends them another sort of level of greatness, I think. It's like even intervening, even poverty and intervening years and time and that could not crush Orson Welles.
I think people just resented the genius, and
they did,
and the mammoth ego that came with it. But you know what? Ego is essential in creating those people, and getting the work. So if Francis Ford Coppola didn't think he could make Apocalypse Now the greatest war movie ever,
it wouldn't have
he wouldn't even come close. I mean, he wouldn't have left San Francisco.
No, again, let's go back to Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando never had to fight for his place in the firmament. You know what I mean? Everybody always understood he was one of acting's greats, and he's just somebody that just sort of like, there's a certain sense that he kind of threw it all away, which he said he always thought acting was a sham business. He said it was a sham business. But Orson Welles never said that filmmaking was a sham business. He didn't like the business of it. But his famous quote is, "It's the greatest toy set that a kid ever had is filmmaking." And I think that's the quote that has about filmmaking that has lived beyond Orson Welles.
Well, I mean, what about Billy Wilder though? Look, Billy Wilder, he made. I mean, I know they were, Fedora and things like that, but what was his last movie? Was Buddy Buddy, right? Is it Buddy Buddy? Is that the? And that was done. He couldn't get. He could not get it. He lived a very long time after that and could not get another movie made. No one would bankroll anything. I mean, so he did not have, obviously, not the same struggle that Wells had his whole life, but towards the end, I mean, he wanted to make movies
That's a thing that happens to a lot of older filmmakers. You know, we've talked about this on the show.
Billy Wilder was afforded an entire career. I mean, he
had won how many Oscars did he win? He won like 5 Oscars.
He made every kind of movie you can think of.
No, you're right. I mean, I'm just saying, it is. Orson Welles is not. I mean, yes, I think Jamie's right. God, what if they had gotten behind him? But you guys all bring up a very good point. People do not like genius. They are scared. People to this day, we only have to turn on the news. We live in a country that is incredibly anti-intellectual, anti-genius, if you were. People who are smart are questioned.
Two things have happened.
Very smart.
Two things have happened. We value. And the two places where we shouldn't value it, art and politics. We value the people that are just like us, just regular Joes, just like us. Mm-hmm. People that can't show us anything beyond what we know in our daily lives as being possible. So that cuts out the role of the artist, or in many cases the role of the politician, who's supposed to foresee a better tomorrow or another plane of evolution.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, we overuse the term genius. I mean, everybody can't be a damn genius.
Yeah, oh God.
I love Louis C.K. has a great line about that, where he's talking about two guys that were standing in line for coffee, and one of them says, "Hey, maybe you should put some sugar in your coffee." And he went, "Man, you're a genius for saying that."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Don't you think whatever genius is wrong?" The wrong word.
Jamie, I agree so much with that. And that is a great bit, Dean. I worked for a long time at a company which I no longer work for, so I can say this. But the guy was saying how this one guy was a genius with computers, and I really just always want to say, dude, anyone who can turn on a computer is a genius to you, okay? Anyone who can put the on switch. I mean, you're so right, James. We do overuse that word so much.